Washington Journal continues.
Judith Yaphe, is the Maliki government ready to meet the demands that were laid down by the president this week?
I think they're ready to meet some demands, a few demands, but they can't meet all the demands. It would be rather simplistic just to look at Iraq as, okay, this is what we want to do now, you help us do it. It's much more complicated.
Of those possibility of what they can meet or cannot meet, what would you say is the difference? What can they do?
Well, we're in the midst of a complicated political structure there. Maliki has to show that he can make decisions, have them carried out, that he's not just doing what the Americans tell him to do or appointing whom they want him to appoint and approving missions that they want. We have made certain targets. We've personalized as we do everything. So this phase of the campaign, or whatever you want to call it, the war, we've objectified Sadr is our problem. Muqtada Sadr, the Iraqi extremist cleric who has a lot of supporters in government and whose support was crucial to Maliki's election as prime minister by one vote. We have other forces. In other words, what I'm trying to say, there is a war within the government of Iraq, so that if Maliki stands up to the United States, good. If he agrees with the United States, maybe that's not so good. So in a sense, he's walking that line, but he also is walking a line. The Iraqis are going places they haven't gone before. How much power and authority he has is a serious question, and what I see is he's trying to assert his power both within the government as the prime minister, as well as trying to walk between what the Americans want or insist, or the way they see what has to be done, and the way his government, the way Iraqis, and the way Iraq's neighbors see it. Complicated.
But, the president laid down some specifics as far as what he wanted to see from the government. I want you to listen to a clip of what he said and respond to it.
Successful strategy for Iraq goes beyond military operations. Ordinary Iraqi citizens must see that military operations are accompanied by visible improvements in their neighborhoods and communities. So America will hold the Iraqi government to the benchmarks it has announced. To establish its authority, the Iraqi government plans to take responsibility for security in all of Iraq's provinces by November. To give every Iraqi citizen a stake in the country's economy, Iraq will pass legislation to share oil revenues among all Iraqis. To show that it is committed to delivering a better life, the Iraqi government will spend $10 billion of its own money on reconstruction and infrastructure projects that will create new jobs. To empower local leaders, Iraqis plan to hold provincial elections later this year. And to allow more Iraqis to re-enter their nation's political life, the government will reform de-Baathification laws and establish a fair process for considering amendments to Iraq's constitution. America will change our approach to help the Iraqi government as it works to meet these benchmarks.
A laundry list of items there. Which would you say is going to be the easiest to complete and which more difficult?
Well, they all have a level of complexity. I think probably I'll come back to one of my first points is if we want Maliki and the Iraqi government to move on all of these things, they have to do it in their own way. They can't just do it in the manner that the Americans describe, because the government is in a very delicate situation. Certainly, Maliki wants responsibility for security, but he doesn't want the criticism when he appoints somebody who is his military commander, for example, of Baghdad, as he did this, I guess yesterday or this morning over there, and it's somebody we say we don't like or is not the best. We can't pick the candidates if he's going to control security. Better life is wonderful. De-Baathification, we've been calling for that for 3 years. National reconciliation was somewhere, I think, in the scheme as well. But there were a lot of things, money, job creation. Now, we've been supposedly dedicated to these goals since 2003 when we went into Iraq. And now we're talking, are these new goals, or we're coming back because they have not been accomplished, and you don't accomplish them overnight. So in a way, you have a battle for hearts and minds, but you also have different sets of power struggles that are not always going to meet our benchmarks, but may be necessary for Maliki to maintain the stability and control of his government as he sees it.
And one of the discussions as far as the government and the people itself was the distribution of oil money. And the president's calling for distribution of oil to all.
Well, I'm not sure what that means, because under the Constitution of Iraq, it says old oil the government can control and can distribute and can manage. But that new oil, in other words, discoveries made now, those decisions go to the provincial authorities, local government. I'm not sure that's been, that's one of the bones of contention within Iraq. So they have to reach some kind of decision and make that all national, or I think they want to, the Iraqis want to set up a national authority or run it through their oil ministry. So that's one of the sensitive issues that has to be decided.
In the papers today, there's a story saying that the Prime Minister has made a selection as far as an appointment. Is Lieutenant General Abu Kanbar. Yes. Who is he and what's he going to do?
I am not sure who he is. Nobody is. The paper says, or the press that I've been reading, that he really isn't a favorite of the Americans. It wouldn't have been our recommendation. But that may be part of the point, that Maliki has to show he's appointing his person. And that tests both his political alliances within Iraq and his relationship with us. Who is he? He was a naval commander in Saddam's military. Well, who wasn't in the Saddam's military? Was captured by us in Kuwait in 1991. I don't think we know a whole lot about his background otherwise.
What's he going to do?
He's in charge of his, Baghdad security. So he, in effect, is going to be the person who is in charge of the Iraqi part and of cooperation. So he's going to be a partner. He's going to, be with us and know what's going on. But who he is, that's a little bit of a mystery.
How does the Iraqi government settle the topic of various groups represented within its own militia, with its own security forces? Because that's always been a point as far as the future of the success of the security forces.
Well, that's where Maliki is testing the Constitution and his authority. It's a decision he made apparently without consultation with his political partners, with his cabinet, with any of the blocks that make up the new government. Can he do that? According to the Constitution, I believe he can. Should he do that? Yes, if he wants to show that he's in charge. But as in everything in Iraq these days, everybody's going to argue about it because there's so many, what can I call it, fiefs within, political fiefs, wars within wars. So they'll argue about it, but he has to show he has the authority to do that.
Our guest is with us for the next 35 minutes. If you want to talk about the future of the Iraq government, especially with the president's plan this week, the numbers will be on your screen. They all start with a 202 area code. It's 737-0002 for those who support Democrats, 737-0001 for those who support President Bush, for those who support others, 202-628-0205. Our guest is a senior research fellow at the National Defense University at their Institute for Strategic Studies. She has previous experience at the CIA. For those who may not know, the National Defense University.
Right. It is the premier joint political military education in our military education system. It's the National War College and several others as well. But it is a joint. It is all forces, all services, focuses on strategy, tactics, and a lot of other issues. But if you want to be an admiral or a general, it's your one of the last educational tickets that you have to punch. Talk about the new American leadership in the Middle East and how this factors into the president's plan. Well, the new leadership, are we talking about the military leadership? Yes. General Petraeus is certainly well known for his great successes in Mosul, in which he applied his insurgency strategy at a local level and did a lot of other things with a lot of independence, which was probably good, to get the city up and running, to establish commerce, and got very high marks for that. We're very well publicized effort as well. Now he takes over as the general in Iraq, and we remain to see what that means. It certainly would seem it's part of the new strategy, if you want to call it the surge or the additional forces, to take, we've made symbolic control of Baghdad. He who controls Baghdad controls Iraq, so we're continuing along that line. Whether his strategy will work or not, that's not for me to say, but the point is he does represent more, having worked more and practiced a counterinsurgency as opposed to a more conventional way of fighting this war.
Our first call for you comes from Charlotte, North Carolina. Caller, go ahead.
Yes. I would like to get an explanation. I understand there's something called a PSA, I think it's called a PSA agreements between oil companies and Iraq for the next 30 years to take all the oil out of the ground for the next 30 years and to share in those profits. And could you explain what that agreement is? And isn't it true then that we really did go into Iraq for oil? Thanks.
Oh, I hate those oil questions. I'm not sure I know what the PSA is. There's been a lot of controversy over who can sign contracts for oil exploration, development, repairs, all of which is needed, and all of which is going to depend on foreign investment to get done. There are agreements. I'm not aware of 30-year agreements. I know oil development takes a long time. You need to talk to an oil economist or somebody who's more familiar with the industry. But there are contracts being signed. They're not just with American companies. The Norwegians are in the Kurdish area working, but I don't know the terms of that, if that's 30-year or 10-year. I don't know what kind of term, but it requires a long-term contract because of the time it takes to repair and bring in new fields.
Oak Harbor, Washington.
Hi. I just wanted to say that I am 19 years active duty in the military, and contrary to what Mr. Kerry would have you guys believe, we're not all stupid people who are not educated. I'm enlisted. I have a master's degree, and I just wanted to say that I think it has to be left up to the president to make the decision. Congress is just there to advise and consent, not to dictate to the president what is to be done. He is the commander-in-chief, and if the president says that this is something that we need to do, then we should support him. In the military, I support him. The people I work with support him. And we don't believe that taking our things and packing up and leaving Iraq is going to be the solution to the problem. These people that we're fighting, these people are real. These people hate us, and they will not say, good, you guys left to go home. They will follow us home, and the next front is going to be right here in our country.
Caller,
we can't let that happen.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
What do you think about the current military strategy that the president employed this week concerning the future of Iraq?
The current military strategy has to be given a chance to work. It has to be given a chance to work. You can't lay out a strategy and then having the Congress or the Senate asking, so how many people do you think will die as a result of this strategy?
Okay, thanks.
Well, she's made some excellent points. Yeah, the military is well educated. You have only to look at the serving officers to know they have the background. Some have the language skills. General Abizaid is a classic example of what is, I think, the best and brightest and best prepared for our military officers. Having said that, I think she's also right. But I hate to talk on constitutional issues, but the president is the commander-in-chief. Even I think the senators that are most opposed to him in Congress acknowledge that. I've heard Senator Biden say that. But the question of who's going to determine, I think part of the great problem is we're always in a campaign. And we've begun the great campaign for the presidency 2008. So I don't expect a lot of the rhetoric to be as logical or as constitutionally correct as the caller says, but she's got an important point.
Stemming out of the speech, there were headlines reflective of the ones in the Philadelphia Inquirer this morning concerning the actual response from al-Maliki. And this headline says Iraqi leaders' silence on the president's plan raises questions about the crackdown. What do you think about the response specifically from the government right after the speech?
The Iraqi government? Well, tactful, discreet. They may not be sure what we're going to do. They have some very serious questions. It's not just the reaction to the speech that I would look to. Some very significant events have happened in Iraq this week, including our entering an Iranian, whether it was a consulate or an office, and arresting several Iranians, looking at the works of what the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is up to in Iraq. The Iraqis are not comfortable with that. They don't want us using Iraq as a beachhead for what we want to do, or if we want to do anything. I'm not making any assumptions in Syria and Iran, but they don't want to see Iraq used that way. It's not in their interests, and they don't want to see Iraq being used. So we have a lot of issues, and it may be that the president's speech this week is just, it has to be put in context of what the Iraqis really see as a risk to their security and their integrity, their policies.
What's the future of Iran in all this, especially with the United States? There were a lot of statements made about that as well.
Iran's strategy, most people believe, has been controlled chaos in Iraq is fine. They don't want Iraq to be partitioned, to fragment, to divide up. Very bad spillover, a lot of reasons there. But there's always another factor. It's so complicated. And that is that the Iranian strategy, I think, is also, if it's not just about Iraq. For them, everything is out there on the table, but one of the tools they have for leverage on us is Iraq. They have influence, they have an ability to move around and to make us pay. And that's where you have to balance what they see, controlled chaos versus we're going to make you pay in Iraq for the things that we can't deal with elsewhere.
Redlands, California, for Judith Yaphe.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I just want to talk about Nouri al-Maliki.
Yeah.
This guy pretty much does not want to be there. I mean, if you really look at what he said that he's much more qualified as somewhere outside the main government line. And it just tells you so much about the fact that this new Iraq policy is going wrong because the people that are supposed to be administrating this, the Iraqi government, as they call it, does not want to be the government. It's really that simple. And when our head of State Department goes out there and says that this troop escalation is in fact not an escalation, it just makes it sound even more ridiculous because when you send 20,000 of my friends, people that are my age, out to Iraq, it certainly is an escalation. And when they're not around to hang out with me, I definitely know that it's an escalation.
Caller, thanks.
I love your comment about he said that he really doesn't want to be president. How many times have you heard in American history, I do not want to be president. If chosen, I will not run, or you have to, beg me, ask me when I really do want to run. I always question political statements like that. Few politicians really will announce that, boy, I really love being here and I'm really going to do this. It's the beginning of a 4-year term, since they do have, that kind of election system. So I would say wait and see. I would only take at face value what they say about their political futures.
Part of the political solution aspect of Iraq, is there a way of approach that the United States sees as far as what consists of a political solution and the way the Iraqis see a political solution?
Well, I'm not sure what your question is. They have their own view, yes. They have to be seen as being independent of the United States. And I remember when General Casey went out, he thought for his military mission that was essential, that the Iraqis not just be seen, but be in the lead, but certainly that they have to define, a lot of the choices. It can't just be us telling them, and that's where Maliki has a fine line. But I think he needs to keep his options, close to his vest?
Seattle, Washington.
Yes. I wanted to say something just about language. I've been watching the C-SPAN coverage of the Armed Services Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee, and it seems like 4 years into it, the senators who want to be part of the process are still unable to even say the name of the country that we're talking about. We hear about Iraqis and Iraqis and the Iraqis and Maliki, and the whole thing to me is a little offensive. I'm sure the Iraqis who are being asked to do something are saying these people can't even say our names right. What's the point? The new one that really bothers me is the Shiite thing. I don't know. I know it's a word. I know what it means, but I don't know that Iranians even recognize it as the name of the religion.
Well, they do call themselves Shia, partisans of Ali. Some of it just has to do with transliteration and where you learned your Arabic and where you learned your history and where you learn these things. You're right. By now we should be able to say Maliki, not Maliki. That is terribly offensive. It does grate on Arab ears in general, Iraqis in particular. I would say that staff work is very important everywhere. Somebody's got to get their staffers maybe to coach them a little bit better. But that's neither here nor there. You're right on your point. We make mistakes. We should know better. By the way, can I just say one thing? There's a lot of talk about how many of our troops and how many U.S. Personnel over there know Arabic. I think it's a lot more than we're given credit for. I was on the Baker-Hamilton Commission, but I don't think they quite had their statistics right on that.
What was said about how many knew Arabic?
He said something like only 7 people in the embassy knew Arabic or could function, and I find that hard to believe, since I've seen so many who are. I'm not saying they're perfect, but certainly our senior diplomatic corps has been quite good. And again, Abizaid, and there are others like him, and a lot of our soldiers who are working embedded in Iraq picked up some good conversational Arabic.
Jersey City.
Good morning, Pedro and Miss Yaphe. How are you this morning?
Fine, thank you.
I'm just calling up to make a comment because it seems that we're making an assumption about Iraq that if it was up to America to have a stable, democratic Iraq, it would happen. But it's not up to us. It's to the Iraqis. I mean, all states are a construct, and Iraq was constructed at the end of the World War I in order, by Judith Bell, in order just to cut up the Ottoman Empire. And a lot of Iraqis don't even feel that there is such a thing as an Iraq, specifically the Kurds, who since 1991 have been setting up their own autonomous area looking towards a new country. Could it be that this is never going to work because of those points?
No, but I want to thank you first. You flattered me by calling me Judith Bell. I love it. It was Gertrude Bell, a British member of the embassy over there. She was part of the Arab Bureau, which was the old Foreign Office's intel service. But she knew Iraq. She knew fluent both Farsi and Arabic, and she did a lot to design. So thank you for the flattery. That's great. There is in Iraq. There was in Iraq. I have to think that there always will be. It wasn't just invented by Winston Churchill and the British in 1920. It's one of the great myths that a lot of people like to talk about. I think Iraq can survive. I can see the long term. It's hard to see the short term. It's hard to see what is happening right now. We Americans like 60-minute solutions. We like everything over, the commercials done, and the happy ending by the time, the clock is turned to the next hour. It's not going to happen that way. And it doesn't happen in a year or 2 years. Iraqis themselves talk about this could be a 15-year process, 15 years being the time it takes to transform your military from the previous generation into a whole new one. Others say a generational change is necessary. I don't know, but I think Iraqis can do it. But it's partly learning how, but I think even more to the point, Iraqis are trapped in, many of them, in a local. It's about local, all politics is local. It's local control, it's personality rivalries. Learning to play together is a very difficult lesson when they have learned to hate each other under Saddam and for such a long time.
For our guest, Arlington, Vermont.
Yes, good morning. I'm in basic support of the president, and I really feel that if we needed 200,000 troops there, they should be there. And the other day, I was surfing around the channels, and I picked up the House Speaker, and the comment was, we don't have enough men to put into the military. This country was founded on many different principles and ideas. We had a militia some 200 years ago. The men of the United States of America would rise in a moment. Okay, and I'm 52 years old. And if I had to go pack a gun and start shooting at the enemy, I would. And I think that's what this country's all about. We're pushing 300 million people here, okay? They want their freedom. They want their democracy. They're going to fight to the death. And if that's what it takes, that's what we're going to do. And that is a message that should be sent around the world. We're not interested in conquering. We're interested in being and living in a peaceful nation. But
I'll take that as a comment. It's not really a question there. I don't normally comment on military capabilities or do we have manpower. It's just not my area of expertise.
Senator Levin, this week in the Senate Armed Services Committee, made a couple of statements about previous timelines that were established for this government, timelines that were not met when it came to their constitutional review, their election law, about disbanding militias and the like. What makes you think that this time around those deadlines could be met?
I'm not sure they can. I think that the set of deadlines that you described were all unrealistic. It took them, Iraqis, 2 to 3 months to decide on the committee that was going to write the Constitution, and we told them it had to be done in 3 weeks. Our Constitution, in an age when there was no, iPod, telephone in your ear, constantly ringing in your pocket, and all the news programs to tell you what the time is and what you're supposed to be doing, it took longer. Our insistence on deadlines has a lot more to say about our process, our patience, and politics here than it does about what's good in Iraq. And the Iraqis don't have a whole lot of patience either. But certainly they needed time to think about all of the issues and ramifications. You don't just push all that through. So I think that was unrealistic expectations on our part, and a frustration on all sides as well, Iraqi and ours.
One of the things the president said was security achieved by November.
Well, fine, I hope he's right, but hope is not policy and it don't necessarily happen.
Rest in Virginia.
Hi, good morning. I was calling to comment to the enlisted woman with the master's from Washington, where she pointed out that it was that it's George Bush who was the commander-in-chief, and it was only the Congress that was to advise and consent. But I believe it's also the Congress that is the body that can declare war. I don't recall that ever happening. Therefore, this is just, an invasion? You can comment on that, but...
Well, you're right. Declaration of war comes from the Congress, but didn't the Congress approve a declaration of war in November 2002 when they voted? The vote which most of them say, didn't mean it, or I did it then, but if I'd only known then what I know now, I wouldn't have voted that way.
Camilla, Georgia.
Good morning. I appreciate C-SPAN giving all of us a chance to blow off and give our opinions. Yeah. Miss Judith, I'm a Vietnam combat veteran. I was in the Expeditionary Forces in '62, volunteered to go in. And the American people, I'm sure, are tired of hearing Vietnam. But to me, and I'm no way an expert, I'm like the average American citizen. I'm just getting bits and pieces from the news and C-SPAN. And but what I'd like to say is we are, 4 years committed now. And if the Democrats, prohibit the increase in forces or troops, then it's going to look like their fault if we have a massive pullout. On the other hand, if President Bush is allowed to go ahead with this increase, and it's effective, then it's going to be good for the nation and the Republican Party. So I guess what I'm saying is, if the Democrats stop this increase, it could go against them. If they allow it and it works, it could be good for everybody. So I don't know if that's a question or just confusion, but thank you for listening.
No, I think I share your confusion, because it's this politics which is getting involved, and really it's confusing everyone. And I'm not a political person. I don't have a party affiliation. 20 years in the CIA, if nothing else tells you, you don't play in politics. You try to be separate from, and I remain my my religion. But I don't think Congress will really stop the increase. They're going to talk a lot about it. It's going to be a campaign issue. But if they do, the danger they run is you're not supporting the troops, which you have to do regardless of how you feel that the war is right or wrong. No politician wants to be accused of not supporting our American forces abroad. So you're right, they're both in a difficult position. And part of that is just the extreme language of politics, and I think that, you know, if they could have quieter moments and think through some of this, you wouldn't hear the same things. But all of this is out there on the waves. That's what they're all talking about, their next campaign. So, yeah, confusing. But you have to look to what will they really vote on. Congress can vote on money for certain things. For example, Senator Kennedy's resolution not to approve money for the new forces that would be committed. I don't know that that'll go anywhere. And he said very clearly he doesn't want to do anything that would cut support to our forces there. So you got to look beyond some of this language, I think.
The person replacing Zalmay Khalilzad in
Ryan Crocker.
What can you tell us about him? What does he bring?
Career service diplomat, loves to serve in difficult places. He's been in Afghanistan. He's just been ambassador in Pakistan. He's been in Iraq. He went out, I think it was under Mr. Bremer, so he knows what he's getting into. He's got Arabic, he's got language capability, and he is a career diplomat. But what we have to keep in mind is diplomats serve at the request of the president, and they are there to try to make as effective as possible our policies. I think that they come under a lot of criticism, but I think Ryan Crocker is a very seasoned and experienced diplomat in that area of the world. So I think that, you know, he's not going out like he's just been in Washington his full career and doesn't know what he's getting into.
And what would you say about the legacy or the tenure of Mr. Khalilzad?
That's been fascinating to watch. Everyone had expectations of Zal when he went in. He had a lot of opponents, the Iranians and their supporters did not like him because Sunni and very active as ambassador in Afghanistan. And now in Iraq, they didn't know how to deal with him. The Shia didn't like him because they thought he boosted the Sunni side. The Sunnis didn't like him because, after all, we argued for democracy, and that meant the Shia were in power. So the fact that he angered everybody says to me he was very effective.
Harper's Ferry, or Harper Woods, Michigan. Go ahead.
Yes, I had a question and a comment. I've heard educated people say that if we don't fight them there, they'll follow us home. And I'm just wondering, I've never seen or heard of any of these terrorists having planes or ships or a means of getting into the country except through our porous borders. And I was wondering if you could explain, or maybe some of the other callers could, or one of them who feels that's true, could explain to me exactly why they would follow the most powerful military in the world home to fight us. And if they hate us so much, why don't they attack us while we're depleted and while we're weakened now? Thank you.
Well, there's one very simple answer to you. What was 9/11? Terrorists don't come in planes as military warriors in uniform to attack the United States. They can get the planes here. That's what 9/11 was. They can get in for a lot of different reasons, on legal documents. They can find support networks here. I really don't understand why you say that, because I think that it's not that they're going to follow the troops home, but they will be able to target Americans more broadly, which they have shown a capacity to. And having done not just my work in intelligence, but I served 3 years in counterterrorism, I will say that a lot of the countermeasures may have worked, but I wouldn't be too comfortable on that. Americans have always had a certain complacency about how protected and how safe we were because we are so far away, and we found out that wasn't true. Nothing could happen here. It can. We were lucky, and I would say we've been lucky since 9/11 that nothing has happened, but we do have better security as well. But the fact that the president is right in certain aspects. Our leaving before there is more stability and security in the government society there does mean that an encouragement of and the likely risk of, first of all, Iraq in total civil war, but also I think it will hearten those who want to attack us to keep on going. We have targets in a lot of areas. Somalia, many places in Africa, wherever our troops and our civilians are. Now, would this raise the risk there? We've already been attacked in Saudi, both military and civilian. So I just don't see the, I guess I just don't see your point.
Next call, Houston, Texas. Good morning, go ahead.
Hello.
Hi.
This is Captain Alfred, USN retired. Graduate of the Naval Academy in '47, the National War College in the early '70s.
Great.
And if my memory serves, and it's getting a little older all the time, this nation has declared war, Congress has declared war 4 times that I can recall. The ones that most of us would recall are World War I, World War II, but there were others, a Civil War, and I believe the War of 1812, or else the Spanish-American War. Over 200 other wars we've engaged with, and those 200 were all by what's called continuing resolution of the Congress. And that's exactly what's going on with the hearings right now. We've got the Congress does not have to declare war, although the Constitution gives it the right to. But the continuing resolution is very powerful, as we saw in Vietnam, because the Democratic-controlled Congress at that time just cut off the money, which is the right of the U.S. Congress. So the system works, but most people I talk to always think we're in some kind of illegal war if Congress hadn't declared it. Would you comment on that, please, ma'am?
Well, you've got some good points. Korean War was never voted on. We did that under what? The UN resolution. No, there's not much to comment. I think you laid it out rather nicely in terms of war happens whether the Congress has approved it or not.
Iran and Syria. What should the United States do as far as talking with them, as far as the Iraq Study Group recommended?
Well, I think the Iraq Study Group had it correct, and I don't think many people really understand what the recommendation was. It wasn't that you have to talk to Iraq and Iran, which means that we're going to talk nice to them, we're going to play well together, we're going to make concessions, and we're going to be allies. It doesn't mean any of that. It means they're there, period. Iran's border with Iraq is Iraq's biggest and longest border, biggest, most powerful neighbor, most influence inside. There's a 1,400-kilometer, 900-mile border there. How do you not talk to Iran? How do you not talk to any of the neighbors? The Iraqis themselves don't want the neighbors meddling in their politics. Yes, there are a lot of Iranians running around doing a lot of things. The Saudis care a lot about what's going on. The Turks are watching. Everybody's watching. And they're watching each other watch what's going on in Iraq. But the Iraqis don't really want them meddling. Even Shia political parties that have been hosted by Iran, are supported by them, I don't think are 100% comfortable or see themselves as just a tool of Iran. But how do you just ignore them? So Baker's recommendation, the commission and Secretary Baker spoke of it very clearly. You just can't ignore. It's there, they're in the room, and you have to deal with realities. Doesn't mean you like them, doesn't mean you're going to agree, doesn't mean you're going to play together, but they're there. To ignore them and to think you can isolate them is wrong. It's simplistic.
Factor in how the rest of the world views this, especially in light of this week. There's a story in the New York Times looking at reaction from Europe and elsewhere to the president's plan.
Everyone is uncomfortable with it. The reaction outside, outside Iraq and outside our system is not understanding and not trusting the United States. What do you mean? Are you really just talking about a short-term surge? What are your real plans? You haven't talked about your plans after the military draws down. Do you want bases? What are your intentions? How do you see yourself in Iraq? So there are a lot of issues, but there is extreme discomfort as to what we intend. Will we work as in a broader coalition? And even though we have support and we stand with the Europeans on many of our issues with Iran, especially the nuclear issue, still there is a reluctance to go as far be as dramatic, insist on as heavy penalties and sanctions as we would like. So there's a lot of discomfort there.
Voluntown, Connecticut.
Good morning, and thank you for C-SPAN. I have a friend who is a Marine that recently returned from Fallujah, who reported to me that the Shia largely comprised the military and the police were largely Sunni. Could you please comment on that, assuming that he's correct, and how that would affect the situation of civil war? And I'll take my comments off the air. Thank you.
Fallujah is a predominantly Sunni area. I would doubt that the police there are Shia if they are locally drawn. I would assume that there's a lot of Sunni control there. Now, I think what is true in general, to go to a sort of a higher level of analysis or ministries, is that the police, for the most part, are Shia. And a lot of what the problem is that the government has legitimized Shia militias. The big one, the Badr militia, which is the armed force of the Supreme Council for the Islamic Revolution, the party that's really the dominant party among the Shia. Maliki himself is from the Dawa, from a different side of that. They don't have a militia. But the issue here, the police are almost entirely Shia, and in Baghdad and many other areas are responsible for a lot of the attacks on the Sunnis. If they say there's a security problem, as some of our American senior officers say, their solution is to go after the Sunnis. There are Sunnis more in the National Army. It's the statistics. The Iraqi military, from the time it was established in 1920, has almost always been 80% Shia. The largest body of recruits comes from the largest segment of the population. Officer corps have been Shia. That's changing, but not in a highly significant number. But I think that your friend may have gotten a little confused, because it seems to me the police up there were Sunni, but the troops used to help us quell the outbreak of violence were from Shia and Kurdish units, and that may be the confusion.
Two more calls. New York City, go ahead.
Yes, hi. I first just wanted to say that about 3 weeks ago, you had a caller who said that he was the only liberal on the West Coast who was still supporting the president, and I think I'm the only liberal on the East Coast who's still supporting the president. But what I wanted to ask your guest is two things. One is if she could comment on how important the role of the United States presence currently is in making it possible for the Iraqi civilians to not turn to militias for their security. That's one. And the second question is, it has occurred to me that in Bosnia, there was a similar situation of ethnic cleansing going on as there is now in Iraq, and I'm wondering to what extent that's the Al Qaeda is responsible for that, because I know in Bosnia the neighborhoods were mixed, Muslims and other religious groups got along, and it was similarly in Iraq until all of this has started, or it looked that way anyway.
Caller, thank you.
Yeah, excellent questions. We are not helping in the security situation in the sense that Iraqis are turning to Iraqis for their local support. It doesn't help if we come in during the day, they know we're coming, we clean out an area, and then we go back to barracks at night. One of the key elements of Petraeus' strategy is to embed forces to be there, and to be there to 24/7. When we've done that, we've been much more effective. You have to have a visible presence. What that means is less emphasis on force protection, in the sense that it can't be the sole determinant in where we're going to be, how visible. But if I were an Iraqi, I may not like the party in power. I may not like, if I'm a Shia, I may not like the Syri or the Dawa or the government. I may be a secular person. I may be a lot of different things, but I'm going to go at the end of the day to the group that's going to offer me the greatest hope of personal security and safety. And if that's with an outlawed militia, if that's with a Muqtada Sadr, it's going to have to be, because that's my primary concern. And we're not doing much to help that, because we're not there, we can't be everywhere, and until that situation is resolved, the militias are going to be seen as having some kind of a role. On the ethnic cleansing thing, let me just say very briefly, we always had, people who watch Iraq, which I've done for over 30 years, have always had an assumption that it couldn't happen here. Iraq does not have a history of sectarian fighting, although it has had ethnic cleansing in the past. But the point is that Iraq has had a very high rate of intermarriage, Sunni and Shia, Arab and Kurd, mixed neighborhoods, mixed cities, working together, highly educated population. What's happened? What's gone wrong? And could what happened in Bosnia replicate here? I've only heard a few stories about marriages, families being broken up because one part is Sunni, one part is Shia. Almost every Iraqi, I know a few, and it's amazing how many, and I have to say the majority of the people that I meet and see quite often have one Shia parent, one Sunni parent. It's deeply ingrained. It's been there for generations. But the ethnic cleansing is a danger. Al-Qaeda's strategy was to encourage ethnic warfare. Yeah, they don't like the Shia. They think this works to their advantage because it creates instability. But there are a lot of other things to trace it back to. It's not just Al-Qaeda that has fed that.
Well, just a few more minutes. Boston, Massachusetts, you're the last call.
Good morning, C-SPAN. Thank you for allowing us to weigh in. And I just have a couple of comments. You touched upon the regional split that was done by the European nations in the 1920s. I know there was an alternative plan at that time that was put forth by two Middle Eastern men or of Middle Eastern descent that was not taken into consideration. But one of the things that I'd like to comment on is, people that say, people of that region hate our way of life, and it's, they don't take this into historical context. I mean, the European nations have been, involved and dictating a lot of splits and diplomacies and things in that region for a long time. We've supported the Shah of Iran, even though he was very, how do I put it? He didn't really reflect the needs of all of his nations or of all of his people. And then when he was overthrown, we were left with this religious zealots.
Caller, we're almost out of time. What's your question, please?
Well, has anybody actually looked at the historical context in which we find ourselves in?
Thank you.
Yes, a lot of people have, and I wish we had time, but we don't. That has been looked at. I'm not sure what you mean by a plan B. There were certainly many in the region who thought that they could have instant independence, and many governments were formed with accepting that on face value and moving on. And this is what happened in Iraq, moving on a national agenda anyway, and the British really couldn't control it. Let me just go to your second point very quickly. Do they hate our way of life? I don't think so. Our way of life is our way. They don't want it imposed on them. It's not about democracy in that sense. Do they hate freedom? I get upset when I hear this because I don't think it's really true. And it's not all about Israel either, which you didn't even mention. But there's something much more basic. We were seen, when we first got into the Middle East, as being not self-interested. We did not have colonial aspirations. We had a revolutionary model. We were seen as being interested in human rights and freedom and self-government. And we've lost so much of that. There's virtually none of that left. And I think the basic reason, when you get down to it, is many in this region feel betrayed by us, that we haven't lived up to our ideals and our professed sense of values, and we have just become another one of the colonial powers trying to implement. That's crude, And it's simple, but I think it's a point that's often missed.
Judith Yaphe is with the National Defense University. Thanks for spending some time with us this morning.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Coming up, we're going to have a discussion on stem cell legislation. The House passed a bill to allow federal spending for embryonic stem cell research. We're going to talk about that with two guests when we come right back.
The U.S. Senate meets on Tuesday to continue debate on amendments to its lobbying and ethics rules for the 110th Congress. One amendment offered by Republican Senator Jim DeMint of South Carolina has to do with the disclosure of earmarks. Despite early Democratic leadership objections to it, the amendment will be back next week with modifications acceptable to both sides. Mark Wegner covers the lobbying issue for Congress Daily.
And there was a fairly tense situation on the floor where there was the early Democratic majority, the bipartisanship and the comity, that was all tested. What will happen probably Tuesday will Senator Reid today, Friday, offered to make some minor changes to the DeMint amendment and said he was interested in votes on Tuesday.
Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid of Nevada says he hopes to finish the bill next week. You can see the Senate live on C-SPAN 2. The U.S. House also continues its legislative business Tuesday afternoon at 2 Eastern. House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer.
The House will consider H.R. 5, a bill to cut in half the interest rates on student loans, and H.R. 6, a renewable energy bill. In addition to that, I want to give notice to the House. I've discussed this with Mr. Blunt. I've discussed it with the leader, Mr. Boehner. It will be our intention to, Nancy Boyda of Kansas is introducing a bill which will provide that members who commit felonies while members of Congress and in the course of their duties will be precluded from receiving pensions. And if they are receiving pensions, we'll have those pensions discontinued.
Besides the bills on student loans, renewable energy, and congressional pensions, the House may also consider a measure to establish oversight of the page system. The House is live on C-SPAN. Also next week, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee will look at diplomatic and military strategy in Iraq, and the House Foreign Affairs Committee will hear from former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. And Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke will testify before the Senate Budget Committee on the long-term budget outlook.